There's absolutely no way the dog should be in here. Nurse Ilara's voice trembled with disbelief as she clutched the security footage printout in her hands. Her bright blue eyes flickered between the paper and the hospital director, Dr. Theron, whose face had drained of color. But there he is. The hospital security office buzzed with hushed murmurs as staff crowded inside. Summoned after the overnight nurse reported something extraordinary. Ilara's finger trembled slightly as she pointed at the grainy image on the screen. The dog, large, shaggy, and a rich golden brown, was curled up beside a frail elderly man in one of the hospital beds. His tail rested gently on the patient's arm, as if he was standing guard. "That's Alistair Jensen's room," Dr. Theron murmured, rubbing his temples. "He's been here for months now. No visitors, no family, just him. And a dog, apparently," said Serafina, one of the younger nurses. Her eyebrows arched in wonder. A dog who somehow figured out how to sneak into a hospital with a full security system. "The overnight guard," Greg muttered, crossing his arms. "I double-checked the footage. The dog comes in right around midnight and leaves before sunrise, every single night. We checked the logs. No one's letting him in. No alarms. No unlocked doors." Ilara shot him a skeptical look. "Dogs don't just walk through locked doors, Greg. How is he getting in?" "That's what I'm saying," Cale replied, shaking his head. "I don't know, but he does." Serafina exhaled softly, shifting her weight. "Is it possible someone brings him in? A patient's family member? Maybe?" Cale shook his head firmly. "We checked. The dog's alone, every time." A ripple of quiet astonishment spread through the room. The hospital was a small one, nestled in the sleepy outskirts of Towner Place, where strange things simply didn't happen. Not like this. Yet here they were, faced with something inexplicably tender. Dr. Theron sighed. "Fine. Set up a camera in Mr. Jensen's room tonight. We need to know how this dog is getting in." That night, as the hospital settled into stillness, the camera rolled. The halls were silent, save for the occasional nurse making rounds. The rhythmic hum of ventilators and the steady beeping of monitors filled the air, a quiet symphony of healing. The staff waited, eyes locked on the security monitor, with the kind of focus usually reserved for emergencies. Then, just past midnight movement, Serafina nearly leaped from her seat. The camera focused on the hallway outside room 214, Alistair Jensen's room. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then, a shadow shifted near the door. The dog appeared, moving with quiet purpose, his golden brown fur glowing softly under the hallway's dim emergency lights. But there was no one else, no doors opening, no gaps in security. The dog simply materialized. The hospital staff watched, breathless, as the dog trotted forward and nudged the door open just enough to slip inside, not with force, but with the ease of someone who knew exactly where they belonged. Inside the room, Alistair Jensen lay asleep, his breaths shallow and uneven. The dog hopped onto the bed with infinite care, circling once before settling beside the old man, resting his head gently on Alistair's arm. The man didn't wake, but his breathing deepened, steadied as if the weight of the dog's presence had anchored him to something warm and safe. A quiet warmth spread through the security office as the staff watched the scene unfold. A dog who shouldn't have been there, in a place where he didn't belong, offering silent comfort to a man who had no one else. "Who is he?" Ilara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Better question," Cale muttered. "Where does he go when he leaves? And how does he get in at all?" The next morning, Dr. Theron made a decision. "We need to follow him." So when midnight came again, a small group of staff gathered, waiting. The dog did not disappoint. Right on time, he padded down the hallway, slipping into Alistair Jensen's room with the same quiet devotion as before. But this time, what Cale and Serafina saw inside made them freeze. Alistair Jensen, who hadn't spoken in weeks, was awake. One frail hand rested on the dog's back, stroking gently as he whispered something too soft for them to hear. His face, usually drawn with exhaustion, was peaceful lit, with something that looked an awful lot like happiness. Serafina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We can't stop this." Cale nodded, lowering his walkie-talkie. "No, we can't." Instead, they stepped back, waiting until morning when the dog left, just as silently as he had arrived. Dr. Theron met them at the nurse's station, his expression unreadable. "Well?" Serafina spoke first, her voice firm but gentle. "Sir, I think the dog should stay." Dr. Theron frowned. "He's not a therapy dog. He's not even a registered service animal. He's helping," Cale interrupted. "That's enough." The doctor exhaled, rubbing his chin. He had seen it himself, the way Alistair's breathing had eased, the way something in him had stirred back to life under that dog's watchful care. After years in this hospital, he knew when something mattered, even when it defied logic. "All right," he said finally. "We keep watching. If this dog is bringing someone peace, then maybe that's what matters." That night, the dog returned once more. The staff watched, some curious, some moved beyond words, some simply unable to look away from something so simple, yet so profound. And Alistair Jensen once again slept soundly, his silent guardian curled faithfully by his side. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know yet, was that Alistair Jensen wasn't the only one the dog had come for. This was only the beginning. Alara tapped her pen absently against her clipboard, staring down at the notes she had taken throughout the day. The staff had spent every shift watching for some sign of the mysterious dog, their curiosity slowly blossoming into something deeper, something like reverence. No one could explain how he got in, or why he had chosen Alistair Jensen's room, but no one wanted to stop him, either. Every nurse, every doctor, even the janitors, had their theories. Some whispered about guardian angels, others wondered if he was a lost pet searching for a home. But whatever the truth, they all felt something extraordinary was unfolding. Serafina, leaning beside Alara at the nurse's station, exhaled sharply. "You know, I heard Mr. Jensen talk again today," she said softly. "He said the dog reminds him of someone. He wouldn't say who, though." Elara's brows furrowed. "Someone, like a person." Serafina shrugged. "I don't know. He just had this far-off look in his eyes. He called the dog Orion. I think that's what he named him." "Orion," Alara murmured, rolling the name around in her mind. It fit. At exactly midnight, Orion appeared again. The security footage confirmed it, but no one needed the cameras anymore. They could feel when he arrived, like the air itself had softened. He padded down the hall, slipping into Alistair Jensen's room and curling up in his usual spot beside the old man. And, as always, Alistair relaxed, his breath deepening into peaceful rhythm. But tonight was different. Alara and Cale had stationed themselves near the hallway, determined to see where Orion went when he left. They waited in the hushed stillness of the hospital night, the steady beep of machines, the distant echo of footsteps, the occasional murmur of a dreaming patient. Time stretched, slow and quiet, until just before Don Orion stirred. Cale nudged Alara. "He's moving." They followed, as silently as they could, their shoes whispering against the tile. Orion walked with quiet confidence, as if he belonged here, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. He passed the nurse's station, turned down the hall, and he's heading toward the east exit, Alara whispered. Cale frowned. "That door's always locked. He won't get out." But then, as Orion reached the door, something impossible happened. The latch clicked. The door swung open just enough for him to slip through, before shutting again with a soft snick. Ilara's heart pounded. "Did you see that?" "I saw it," Cale said, his voice low. "But I don't understand it." They yanked the door open, stepping out into the chilly night air. The parking lot stretched before them, empty and still, bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. But Orion was already gone, vanished into the darkness, as if he had never been there at all. Cale ran a hand through his hair. This doesn't make any sense. Ilara took a steadying breath. We'll figure it out. We have to. The next day, Alistair Jensen was stronger than he had been in weeks. His cheeks held a hint of color, his voice a little firmer. He spoke more still, not often, but enough for the nurses to notice. And every time Orion came, Alistair smiled, the kind of smile that reached deep into the soul and warmed everything it touched. Serafina sat beside Alistair's bed that afternoon, chatting lightly as she checked his vitals. You know, Mr. Jensen, that dog of yours is quite the mystery. Shows up out of nowhere, no one knows where he comes from or how he gets in. Alistair gave her a tired but knowing look. You don't need to know where he comes from, dear. You just need to let him be here. Serafina tilted her head. You really believe that, don't you? He nodded. We don't always get to know why good things happen. Sometimes we just need to be grateful that they do. That night, Ilara and Kale came prepared. Instead of waiting by the door, they carefully fastened a small GPS tracker inside a loose loop on Orion's collar. They had no idea if it would work, no idea if they'd get any answers at all, but they had to try. When dawn came and Orion slipped away once more, Ilara raced to her phone, pulling up the tracking app. A blinking dot appeared on the screen, moving fast, heading straight out of town. She grabbed Greg's arm. We have to follow him. They jumped into Ilara's car, the GPS leading them farther than they expected. The town faded behind them, replaced by open roads, sparse trees, and, eventually, a small, run-down house at the very edge of the countryside. The signal was coming. From inside, Ilara and Kale exchanged glances before stepping out of the car. The house looked abandoned, paint peeling, windows cracked, the porch sagging under years of neglect. But the front door was slightly ajar. Kale hesitated. Are we really doing this? Ilara nodded. We need to know. They stepped inside. The house was quiet, dust motes swirling in the dim morning light. In the center of the living room sat an old, worn dog bed, a water bowl nearby, long dried out. On the wall, framed pictures hung crookedly. Ilara moved closer, her eyes scanning the photographs. Then she saw it. Greg, she whispered. Look, Dot. In the pictures, a younger Alistair Jensen stood beside a golden brown dog, the same dog, Orion. Greg, single quotes as breath, hitched. That's impossible, Ilara. Reached out, gently brushing the dust from one of the framed photographs. The date printed at the botjora was from nearly 15 years ago. This dog shouldn't be here, Kale murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He should be gone, Ilara finished for him. But he's not. He came back. A shiver ran down her spine, from fear, but from something deeper, something beautiful. This wasn't just strange, it was right. They left the house in silence, the weight of their discovery settling over them like a quiet revelation. When they returned to the hospital, Alistair was awake, a soft smile touching his lips. His hand rested on Orion's back as the dog curled up beside him, and in that moment, neither of them looked like they had a care in the world. Ilara didn't say anything about what they had found. Neither did Greg. Some things didn't need to be explained. Some things were better left as they were. But as she watched Orion settle in beside Alistair, something in her knew this wasn't just a visit, it was a promise, and it wasn't over. Yet, Alistair Jensen's improvement did not go unnoticed. The man who had spent months lying motionless in bed, barely speaking, now had life in his eyes. He still wasn't strong enough to move around much, but there was a quiet determination in him that hadn't been there before, and everyone knew why. Orion continued his nightly visits, arriving like clockwork and curling up beside Alistair. Every morning, he would disappear just before sunrise, slipping away through the same mysterious means. No one tried to stop him anymore. They had all accepted that he belonged here, even if they didn't understand how or why. Serafina sat with Alistair one afternoon, watching as he absently stroked Orion's fur. He's helping you, isn't he? She asked softly. Alistair nodded. More than you know. His voice was still rough from lack of use, but there was a strength in it now. I thought I'd never see him again. Serafina hesitated. Alistair, how do you know him? The old man sighed, leaning back against his pillows. Orion was my dog, a long time ago. My wife and I adopted him when he was just a pup. He was the best dog I ever had. Always knew when I needed him. Always by my side. His gaze drifted toward the window, his thoughts far away. He passed 15 years ago. Seraphine's heart clenched. Then, how is he here? Alistair didn't answer right away. He scratched behind Orion's ears, the dog leaning into his touch. Maybe some bonds don't break. Maybe some love is too strong to fade. Serafina wanted to believe that, but the logical part of her mind rebelled. Dogs didn't come back. Not like this. Yet she had seen the photos in Alistair's old house, the undeniable proof that Orion had once belonged to him, and here he was, as real as the chair she was sitting in. Alara and Kale had decided to keep their discovery to themselves. There was something sacred about it, something that didn't need explanations. They had stopped tracking Orion's movements, stopped trying to figure out how he got in. All that mattered was that he was here. But one night, things took a turn. It started with a phone call. Alara had just settled into the nurse's station when the emergency line rang. Nurse Alara speaking. She answered, OJORAHATIC. Ally, we need assistance in room 214, came the urgent voice of Dr. Theron. Mr. Jensen is unresponsive. Alara's heart dropped. She was out of her chair before she had even hung up, rushing down the hall with Serafina and Kale on her heels. They burst into the room to find Alistair lying still in his bed, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Orion was curled up against his side, unmoving as if he could sense what was happening. Dr. Theron was already checking Alistair's vitals. His pulse is weak. We need to move fast. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The crash cart was brought in, monitors beeped wildly, and the hospital staff worked with practiced efficiency. But then Orion did something that made everyone freeze. The dog let out a low, mournful whine. Then he stood up, stepping carefully over Alistair's arm. His brown eyes locked onto Alistair's face, and he let out a single, soft bark before laying his head down on Alistair's chest. A moment later, Alistair took a deep breath. The monitors steadied. His heartbeat, which had been fluttering dangerously, evened out. His breathing grew stronger. Slowly, his eyes flickered open. The room was silent, every doctor and nurse staring in shock. Alistair blinked up at the ceiling, then turned his head, slightly to look at Orion. A small, knowing smile touched his lips. "You're still here," he whispered. Dr. Theron, always the rational man, cleared his throat. "We should keep monitoring him closely." "This could have been a coincidence, but it wasn't," Alara interrupted, her voice firm. "We all saw it." Dr. Theron didn't argue. He simply nodded, his eyes lingering on Orion a moment longer before turning back to his patient. "For now, let's just be grateful he pulled through." Alistair was kept under close watch for the next 24 hours. But he showed no signs of another crisis. In fact, he seemed stronger than before, and Orion remained by his side, rarely leaving except for the brief moments he disappeared before dawn. But something about the incident had shaken Alara that night. Long after her shift had ended, she found herself sitting in the hospital garden, staring up at the sky. The stars twinkled above, indifferent to the mysteries playing out below, and for the first time, she wondered if some things weren't meant to be understood, just felt. Below them, Kale found her there a while later, hands tucked in his pockets. He couldn't sleep either. Alara shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about it. Alistair should have crashed. He should have died." Kale finished the thought for her, his voice gentle. "But he didn't." Alara sighed, her shoulders relaxing. "Just a fraction. Yeah, but he didn't. Orion was there. And somehow, he saved him. Cale settled beside her on the bench, the wood creaking softly under his weight. You know what I think? He leaned back, gazing up at the vast, star-speckled sky. I think we don't always get the answers we want. Sometimes, things happen that we're not meant to understand. He exhaled slowly, and maybe that's okay. Alara wanted to argue, to insist there had to be a reason for all of this. But as she tilted her head up, taking in the endless stretch of Nightinky, black and shimmering with distant stars, she wondered if Cale was right. Maybe some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Maybe some were just meant to be felt. Inside the hospital, Orion lay curled up beside Alistair, his steady breathing matching the old man's own. As the first golden rays of dawn stretched through the window, painting the room in soft light, Alistair reached down, his trembling fingers resting on the dog's head. I'm not ready to go yet, Orion, he murmured, voice rough but warm. Not just yet. And Orion, as if he understood every word, gave a small, slow wag of his tail and stayed right where he was. The hospital settled into its usual rhythm, but there was an unspoken awareness among the staff, a quiet reverence for the extraordinary happening in room 214. Everyone was careful not to speak too loudly about it, as if the mere mention might shatter the delicate magic woven between Alistair Jensen and his loyal companion. Serafina had never considered herself a superstitious person, yet she found herself lingering near Alistair's door more often than before, watching the way Orion curled up beside him every night without fail. She wasn't the only one. Ilara and Cale had stopped trying to unravel the mystery of Orion's arrivals and departures. It no longer mattered. What mattered was Alistair, his cheeks regaining color, his voice growing stronger, his appetite returning. For the first time in months, he even asked to sit up in bed. That night, as Ilara finished her rounds, she glanced at the security monitor near the nurse's station. As expected, Orion was already in Alistair's room, nestled in his usual spot. But this time, Alistair wasn't asleep. He was sitting up, speaking softly, his frail fingers combing through Orion's thick fur. She didn't know what he was saying, but the sight of it made her breath catch. It was easy to forget that before Orion, Alistair had spent months lying, in silence, his body weakening, his spirit fading. Serafina approached from behind, her voice soft. You see it too? Ilara nodded, unable to tear her eyes from the screen. I don't think we'll ever understand what's happening. Serafina smiled, faintly. Maybe we're not supposed to. The night passed without incident, but something felt different. Ilara sensed it the moment she stepped into the hallway. The next morning, the air itself seemed heavier, as though the world had shifted while no one was looking. She made her rounds, quickly, her pulse quickening as she neared room 214. The door was slightly ajar, just as it always was when Orion left before dawn. But this time, when Ilara stepped inside, Alistair was awakened. So was Orion. He was still there, still curled beside Alistair, but his body was tense, his ears pricked forward. His warm brown eyes, usually so calm, were alert, fixed on something unseen. Alistair's fingers were buried in Orion's fur, his grip weak but steady. Ilara frowned. Mr. Jensen. Alistair met her gaze, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. It wasn't fear, not exactly, more like quiet recognition. He's waiting, Alistair said softly. Something's coming. A chill traced Ilara's spine. What do you mean? Alistair didn't answer. He just looked down at Orion, his hand still resting on the dog's back. Ilara stepped closer, trying to make sense of the unease settling in her chest. Then the machines erupted in frantic beeps, Alistair's heart rate spiking wildly. RELARA lunged into action, slamming the call button. Within seconds, Serafina and Cale burst in, followed by Dr. Theron. The room became a whirlwind of movement, sharp orders, swift hands, the hum of urgency thick in the air. But through it all, Orion didn't move. He stayed pressed against Alistair's side, his presence an unshakable anchor in the storm. Minutes stretched, thin and trembling with tension then. As suddenly as it began, the crisis passed. Alistair's heart steadied, his breathing evened, the machines quieted. Dr. Theron exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. That was close, Serafina nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted Alistair's IV. Too close, Alara stepped back, her eyes flickering to Orion. He was still watching Alistair, his body still, his breathing even. But there was something in his eyes, something deep, something knowing. Dr. Theron checked Alistair's vitals once more before sighing. He needs rest. We'll keep monitoring him. As the team filed out, Ilara lingered for a moment longer. Alistair's eyes were closed. Now, his breathing slow and steady. And Orion stayed. But even Orion remained at his side, his head resting gently against Alistair's arm like a devoted guardian. You knew, didn't you? Ilara whispered, more to herself than to the dog. You knew it was coming. Orion didn't respond. Course he didn't. But the way he nestled just a little closer to Alistair made her feel, deep in her chest, that he had heard her. The following days passed in a fragile, golden kind of peace. Alistair remained stable, though he was weaker than before. Orion never left his side, not even for a moment. The staff had long since stopped questioning his presence. Instead, they wove him into their routines as naturally as sunlight through a window. It was Kale who finally gave voice to the quiet truth they'd all been carrying. One evening, as he and Alara stood by the nurse's station, watching Alistair's door from afar, he murmured, "He's not just here to help Alistair get better, is he?" Alara swallowed hard. "No, he's not." Kale nodded slowly, as if he'd already known the answer before asking. "He's here to stay with him, until the end." Alara looked away, blinking back the sudden sting in her eyes. "Yeah, I think he is." Neither of them spoke after that. They didn't need to. The truth hung between them, unspoken yet steady as certain as the rhythmic beep of Alistair's heart monitor. That night, when Ilara checked the security footage, something sent a wave of warmth spilling through her. Orion was still in Alistair's room, as always, but for the first time since they'd started watching, Alistair had fallen asleep with a smile on his face. Alara shut off the monitor and leaned back in her chair. She didn't need to watch anymore. She didn't need to unravel how Orion came or went. Some things weren't meant to be understood. Some things just were. And in that moment, she knew whatever came next, Orion wouldn't let Alistair face it alone. The hospital moved forward, as it always did. Patients came and went. Staff bustled through their rounds. The symphony of beeping monitors filled the halls. But for those who paid attention, there was something different about room 214. Something quiet, something sacred. Alistair Jensen was still here, and so was Orion. And in some quiet, inexplicable way that mattered, Serafina had begun sitting with Alistair more often. She told herself it was just part of her duties, ensuring his comfort. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She wanted to understand. She wanted to witness whatever magic was unfolding, even if she couldn't name it. One evening, as she smoothed Alistair's blankets, she finally asked the question that had been lingering in her heart. "Alistair, do you remember when you first saw Orion again, when he showed up here?" Alistair's tired eyes fluttered open. He took a slow breath, then nodded. "I do." Serafina sat beside him. "What did it feel like?" A soft smile touched Alistair's lips, like something I'd been waiting for, without ever knowing it. His voice was a fragile thread of warmth, like coming home. Serafina swallowed. "You said you lost him years ago, but you don't seem surprised that he's here now." Alistair's fingers trailed through Orion's fur, his touch tender. "Seraphine, there are things in this world we can't explain. Doesn't mean they aren't real. Doesn't mean they aren't meant to be." She wanted to believe that, but logic, science, reason they all insisted otherwise. Dogs didn't just return, not like this. And yet, she had seen it. As the night deepened, Alistair grew weary, his words softening, his breaths slower. Serafina stayed with him a little longer before stepping into the hall. Alara waited by the nurse's station, arms crossed. "How is he?" she asked. Serafina sighed. "Tired, but peaceful. He believes Orion is here for a reason." Alara nodded, as if she'd expected nothing less. "I think we all do." Cale approached, setting down his clipboard. "You know, I checked again. No records, no sightings. The door logs still don't explain how he comes or goes." Serafina wasn't surprised. "Maybe we should stop trying to explain." It got. Cale smirked. "That doesn't sound like you." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Yeah, well, I guess some things change." That night, Alara, Serafina, and Cale lingered near room 214, keeping their distance but unable to look away. Orion stayed curled against Alistair, as he always did, and Alistair, for the first time in a long time, looked content. The next morning, Alistair woke up stronger than anyone had dared hope. He sat up without prompting. He ate a full breakfast. He even cracked a joke for the young nurse checking his vitals. It was as if, against all odds, something inside him had begun to mend. Dr. Theron reviewed Alistair's charts, his brow furrowed. "This doesn't make sense." Alara raised an eyebrow. "Are you really still trying to make sense of it?" Dr. Theron exhaled sharply. "I suppose not, but medically speaking, this kind of improvement shouldn't be possible." Serafina glanced at Alistair, who was scratching Orion behind the ears with a fondness that lit his tired eyes. Maybe he just needed a reason to get better. And perhaps that was true. Perhaps Orion's presence had given Alistair something no medicine or treatment ever could: a sense of belonging, a harbor in the storm, a reason to hold on. Over the next few weeks, Alistair's condition continued to improve. The hospital staff watched in quiet wonder as Alistair regained his strength. It wasn't miraculous, not exactly. He still tired easily, still needed help with some things, but he was awake, engaged, and smiling more than anyone had seen in months. One golden afternoon, as Serafina fluffed Alistair's pillows, he chuckled, his voice warm with amusement. "You all thought I wouldn't make it, didn't you?" Serafina smirked. "I think you surprised all of us." Alistair patted Orion's back. Not him, he knew. Just then, Alara walked in, a stack of paperwork in her hands. "Alistair, do you realize you might actually be able to go home soon?" Alistair's eyes widened slightly. "Home?" Alara nodded, her smile softening. "Your vitals are stable, your strength is improving, and Dr. Theron thinks with the right in-home care you could be discharged within a few weeks." Alistair fell silent, looking down at Orion. His fingers traced through the dog's fur, his expression thoughtful. "I never thought I'd go home again." "Well," Alara said gently, "it looks like you might." As the days passed, the idea of leaving the hospital became more real. Alistair was moved to a different wing for physical therapy, working to regain his mobility, and, through it all, Orion remained at his side, a steady, comforting presence. The thought of finally going home was both thrilling and daunting. Alistair hadn't been home in so long. What would it be like? Could he manage on his own? One evening, as Serafina sat beside him, she asked softly, "Are you ready for it?" Alistair took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I think it's time." The staff prepared meticulously for Alistair's discharge. Arrangements were made, supplies gathered, plans put in place to ensure he had everything he needed. And then came the question no one wanted to voice aloud. "What about Orion?" Cale asked one night, as he and Alara reviewed Alistair's final medical notes. Alara hesitated. "I don't know. He's not really ours to decipher." Serafina, overhearing, walked up. "Orion will do what he's always done. He'll go where he's meant to be." None of them had an answer. None of them knew what would happen when Alistair walked. out those doors. But they had all come to trust one thing. Warrior knew more than any of them did. The night before Alistair's discharge, the hospital felt different. The usual hum of machines, the quiet murmurs of night shift nurses, it was all the same. And yet, there was an unspoken awareness among the staff in room 214. Alistair lay awake, Orion curled against him. His fingers moved absently through the dog's fur as he stared at the ceiling. "You've been with me this whole time," he murmured. "I don't know how you got here, and I don't know why, but I do know one thing: I couldn't have done this. Without you." Orion didn't move, but his warmth pressed against Alistair's side, steady and sure. Alistair closed his eyes. "Whatever happens, Jorohoro, I hope you'll still be here." Orion let out a soft huff, as if he understood, and in the quiet of the night, with the steady rhythm of breathing filling the room, Alistair drifted off to sleep, one last time in the hospital, but perhaps for the first time in a long time. Feeling whole, the morning of Alistair Jensen's discharge was met with a quiet buzz of anticipation. The nurses who had grown fond of checking on him, the doctors who had monitored his slow but undeniable progress, even the janitorial staff who passed his room every evening. Everyone felt a certain warmth when they thought of room 214. And now, Alistair was leaving. Ilara walked down the hall, clipboard in hand, ensuring every detail was perfect. Alistair's medical records had been transferred, his prescriptions arranged for home delivery, an in-home nurse scheduled. Everything was in order, everything except one lingering question. Serafina leaned against the nurse's station, arms crossed as she stared at the paperwork. "We're not really just letting him leave without knowing what happens to Orion, right?" Kale exhaled slowly. "I don't think we get to decide that." "Maybe not," Serafina admitted. "But what if Orion just disappears? What if the moment Alistair walks out those doors, he's gone?" Her voice was softer now, uncertain. "I don't want that." Ilara didn't have an answer. No one did. The past weeks had been spent watching the impossible unfold. Now, they stood on the edge of a moment none of them had prepared for. What if Orion was only meant to be here, in the hospital? What if he wasn't supposed to go beyond these walls? Alistair, meanwhile, seemed calmer than any of them. He sat up in bed, hands folded in his lap, while Orion lay curled at his side. The old man watched the staff shuffle in and out, making last-minute checks, and through it all, his fingers never stilled, absently stroking the dog's thick fur. "You all look worried," he remarked after a while, his voice laced with quiet amusement. Serafina smiled. "Maybe we are. It's not every day someone recovers faster than expected, and it's definitely not every day a dog shows up in a locked hospital and refuses to leave your side." Alistair chuckled. "Life's full of surprises." Ilara approached, the bed, clipboard in hand. "Alistair, are you ready? Your transport should be here soon." Alistair nodded slowly, his weathered face softening. "As ready as I'll ever be." A short time later, the transport team arrived. As the wheelchair was rolled in, Alistair, with gentle assistance, eased himself into it with surprising grace. The hospital staff gathered subtly in the hallway, pretending to go about their business but failing to hide their tender curiosity. Their eyes followed as Alistair was wheeled toward the exit, Orion walking calmly beside him like a faithful sentinel. The Aujarahatic doors slid open with a whisper, revealing the golden morning light outside. A crisp autumn breeze rushed in, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the distant hum of city life. Alistair closed his eyes for a moment, drinking in the freshness like a man tasting freedom after a long imprisonment. Ilara and Kale stood near the entrance, their gazes locked not just on Alistair but on Orion. This was the moment of truth they'd all quietly wondered about. Would he cross that threshold? Or would this be where their extraordinary journey, together, ended? Alistair, sensing the weight of the moment, looked down at his furry companion. "Well, old friend, what do you say?" For a heartbeat, Everything seemed to pause. The hospital sounds fading, the world holding its breath. Then, with quiet determination, Orion took a step forward, then another, and another. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the watching staff. Orion walked beside Alistair's wheelchair, his tail waving gently, completely at ease, as if this was always part of the plan, as if he'd never considered any path that didn't lead him wherever Alistair went. Serafina let out a soft, joyful laugh, shaking her head in wonder. Of course, she murmured. He was never going to stay behind. Cale folded his arms, his smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Guess we got our answer. Alara felt warmth blossom in her chest as she watched the pair disappear into the waiting transport vehicle. They hadn't lost Orion after all. He didn't belong to the hospital. He belonged to Alistair, heart and soul. As the vehicle pulled away, the moment felt almost sacred, as if they'd all witnessed something far greater than themselves. Serafina turned to Alara, her voice hushed. Think we'll ever see them again? Alara considered this, then answered with quiet certainty, I think they'll be just fine. And somehow, in her bones, she knew it was true. For Alistair, who hadn't seen home in nearly a year, the approach to his familiar street brought a lump to his throat. This wasn't just a house, it was a living museum of memories, a place he'd resigned himself to never seeing again. When the vehicle slowed to a stop, Orion, ever patient, ever present, sat upright beside him, as if understanding the significance of this homecoming. The moment the door opened, Orion hopped out first, sniffing the crisp air before turning back to Alistair with what could only be described as a doggy smile, as if to say, we're home, old friend. Maris, the transition nurse, unbuckled Alistair's seatbelt with gentle hands. Take your time, Mr. Jensen, she murmured. No rush at all. Alistair nodded but hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of this threshold. Sensing his uncertainty, Orion nudged his hand with a wet nose, one simple, reassuring gesture that steadied Alistair's resolve. With help, he settled into his wheelchair and exhaled slowly. The house stood just as he remembered, though the white porch paint had peeled a bit more, and the lawn had grown wild in his absence. But it was home, unmistakably, irrevocably home. Orion paused at the front door impatiently, his tail wagging like a metronome. Maris chuckled. Looks like someone's eager to get inside. Alistair managed a small, trembling smile as he reached for the handle. When the door swung open, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. The comforting scent of aged wood and faint pipe tobacco. The way the afternoon sunlight painted golden rectangles on the worn wooden floors. Orion trotted in first, his nails clicking a happy rhythm as he made his inspection tour, poking his nose into the kitchen, down the hallway, into the bedroom, as if personally verifying that everything was exactly as it should be for his human's homecoming. Alistair wheeled himself in slowly, drinking in every familiar detail with the reverence of a man rediscovering paradise. Maris busied herself checking his oxygen supply. We'll have someone checking in regularly, she reminded him gently. But if you need anything at all, day or night, you've got my number. Alistair nodded gratefully. I appreciate that more than you know. Orion completed his inspection and returned to Alistair's side, leaning against his leg with a contented sigh. Alistair reached down, his fingers sinking into the thick fur behind Orion's ears. Guess it's just you and me now, huh boy? The dog responded with a small huff, his tail thumping against the floor like a heartbeat. Those first days home were an adjustment. The silence felt deeper than Alistair remembered. The constant hospital hum of machines and chatter replaced by a stillness that was both comforting and strange. But Orion never left his side. When Alistair moved from room to room, Orion was his shadow. When he napped, Orion curled up beside him. At night, the dog settled at the foot of his bed, his steady breathing a lullaby Alistair hadn't realized he'd missed. One evening, as Alistair sat in his old recliner with Orion at his feet, he let his thoughts drift like autumn leaves. He'd been granted time he never expected, a second chance he hadn't dared hope for. And while he didn't know how much time remained, one truth shone clear as morning light. He wouldn't waste a single moment of it. It began with small acts of living. Each morning, Alistair dressed properly. Instead of staying in his robe, he ate at the kitchen table rather than in his chair. When the sun smiled down, he and Orion would sit on the porch together, watching the world go by. Two old souls content just to be home. Together, neighbors who hadn't seen Alistair in months began stopping by with warm smiles and open arms. Mrs. Eudora from next door arrived one evening with a steaming casserole still bubbling from the oven, its savory aroma filling the porch. Jorah, the mailman, started taking longer breaks on Alistair's front steps, sharing colorful updates about the town's happenings between deliveries. The whole neighborhood had quietly assumed they'd seen the last of Alistair Jensen, but now that he was home, they welcomed him back like spring welcoming the sun after a long winter. Orion took to these visits like he'd been greeting neighbors his whole life. His tale would begin its joyful metronome swing the moment footsteps approached, yet he always remained seated politely at Alistair's side, a silent guardian wrapped in golden fur. One particularly lovely afternoon, as Alistair sat enjoying the dappled sunlight dancing through the oak leaves, a familiar car rolled into the driveway. Alara and Serafina emerged, their faces lighting up like children on Christmas morning when they saw Alistair on the porch. "Well, look at you," Alara exclaimed, resting a hand on her hip with mock sternness. "Settling in just fine, I see." Alistair chuckled, the sound richer and fuller than it had been in the hospital. "Doing my best," he replied. Serafina immediately knelt to scratch behind Orion's velvety ears. "And how's this handsome fellow adjusting?" "Like he's lived here forever," Alistair said, watching the dog lean into Seraphine's touch with blissful contentment. Alara exhaled softly as she took in the familiar surroundings. "It's good to see you here, Alistair. Really good." For a moment, Alistair's eyes grew distant. "Never thought I'd see this place again," he admitted quietly. "Figured my story was just about finished." Serafina reached out, giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You've got more chapters left than you think," as Alara perched on the porch railing, she added. "The hospital hasn't been the same without you too. Too quiet. Feels ... different." Alistair smirked. "Well, I suppose we did bring some excitement. That's one way to put it," Serafina teased, her laughter like wind chimes in the afternoon air. But when Alistair looked down at Orion, who was watching, the women with that quiet, knowing gaze of his voice softened. "He's the real miracle here." Alara tilted her head, studying Alistair's face. "You really believe that, don't you?" Alistair met her gaze squarely. "I don't think Orion came back just for me. I think he came to remind me of something important, that life isn't done until it's truly done." The two nurses exchanged a glance, both remembering the extraordinary days in room 214. Yet seeing Alistair now, in his element with Orion by his side, the miracle felt even more profound. They stayed until the sunlight turned golden, sharing stories that left all of them laughing until their sides ached. When it came time to leave, Serafina crouched to give Orion one last affectionate scratch. "You take good care of him, okay?" Orion's tail thumped happily against the porch boards as Alistair smiled. "Oh, he already does." As their car disappeared down the tree-lined street, Alistair leaned back in his chair, bathed in the golden glow of evening. Orion rested his head on Alistair's foot with a contented sigh. There was no hurry now, no ticking clock, just the peaceful certainty of Jorahoro's sunrise waiting patiently over. The horizon. Days at home settled into a rhythm as comforting as a favorite sweater. Mornings began with the soft crackle of the radio playing old standards, the rich aroma of fresh coffee weaving through sunlit rooms, and Orion's happy snuffling as he made his morning rounds. Alistair cherished these simple rituals, waking in his own bed, seeing Orion's expectant face waiting patiently by his bedside, knowing he was exactly where he belonged. Each day, Alistair challenged himself a little more. The wheelchair that had been his constant companion at first now sat gathering dust in the corner. With every tentative step around the house, Orion remained his steadfast shadow, always close enough to steady him if needed, as if the wise, old dog could anticipate Alistair's every stumble before it happened. Maris, his home nurse, couldn't hide her amazement during one visit. "You're making remarkable progress, Alistair, more than anyone expected." Alistair chuckled, running a hand along Orion's back. "Got myself the best physical therapist around." Maris smiled at the loyal dog. "I don't doubt that one bit. The changes went deeper than just physical healing. Some essential part of Alistair, a part that had resigned itself to fading away in that hospital bed, had reawakened. Where once he'd measured time in memories, now he found himself making plans. Orion's steadfast presence had reminded him that life wasn't something to simply endure, but to embrace. Even the neighborhood noticed the transformation. What began as cautious, tentative visits soon became regular gatherings. Mrs. Eudora's casseroles kept arriving, always with extra scraps for her favorite four-legged neighbor. Jorah, the mailman's quick stops stretched into long chats over lemonade. Even the neighborhood children, who used to race past Alistair's house without a glance, now clustered on his lawn, drawn by Orion's gentle patience and the old man's, suddenly, endless supply of stories, born particularly golden afternoon. As Alistair and Orion enjoyed the porch swing's gentle rhythm, another familiar car pulled up. Ilara and Kale stepped out, their faces breaking into twin sunbeams of delight at the sight before them. "Look at you," Ilara called as she bounded up the steps. "You're practically glowing." Alistair laughed, the sound rich and full. "Flattery will get you everywhere, young lady." Kale leaned against the porch railing, shaking his head in wonder. "We had to see for ourselves. The hospital staff still talks about you too, you know." "All good things, I hope," Alistair said, raising an eyebrow. Ilara grinned. "Mostly, you did leave quite the impression." Alistair's gaze dropped to Orion, who was soaking up Greg's ear scratches with canine bliss. "I think he left a bigger mark." Kale laughed as Orion licked his hand. Hard to argue with that. They talked until the fireflies began their evening dance, trading hospital updates for town gossip. Alistair realized with quiet joy how much he was enjoying the conversation, no longer just an observer of life, but a participant once more. As the first stars blinked awake overhead, Ilara and Kale prepared to leave. At the car door, Ilara hesitated, then turned back with one last question. "You know, we never did figure out how Orion got into the hospital that first night." Alistair looked down at his faithful companion, whose wise brown eyes seemed to hold all the mysteries of the universe. "Maybe," he said softly, "some questions aren't meant to be answered." Kale chuckled as he opened the car door. "Maybe indeed. I think you're right," Alistair murmured after they left. He sat in the honeyed glow of fading daylight, his weathered hand resting gently on Orion's sun-warmed back. The thought settled over him like a comforting blanket. Some things in life weren't meant to be explained. Some beautiful mysteries simply were. The next morning, Alistair awoke to Orion's soft whines at the bedroom door. Following the dog's expectant gaze to the window, he saw autumn's first golden fingers painting the trees, leaves tinged with crimson and amber, the crisp air humming with the promise of new beginnings. Stretching slowly, Alistair marveled at how his body felt stronger than it had in years, as if each day with Orion breathed fresh life into his bones. All right, I'm up," he chuckled as Orion's tail thumped against the floorboards in happy anticipation. Their morning walks had started as timid ventures, just to the porch, then gradually to the mailbox. But today, Alistair felt a new determination stirring in his chest. With his cane in one hand and Orion's sturdy presence at his side, he stepped into the autumn morning ready to reclaim pieces of his world. That day, Alistair set his sights on the small park a few blocks away, a place he hadn't visited in years. Doubts whispered that the journey might be too much, but something in Orion's confident stride quieted those fears. The dog stayed close as they walked, matching Alistair's measured pace with infinite patience, their footsteps creating a soothing rhythm against the crunch of fallen leaves. Neighbors Alistair hadn't seen in ages stopped to chat along the way, their faces lighting up at the sight of him. "I think Orion's the reason," Alistair told them, his smile as warm as the autumn sun. When they commented on his remarkable recovery, when they finally reached the park, Alistair settled onto a familiar bench by the duck pond, breathing in the earthy perfume of damp leaves carried on the cool breeze. Orion sat vigil beside him, watching children toss breadcrumbs to quacking ducks with quiet amusement. Alistair exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. "I forgot how much I loved this place," he confessed to the open air. The truth was, he'd become a prisoner in his own home long before the hospital, too weary, too resigned to see the world's beauty. But now, with Orion's warm weight against his leg, everything seemed vibrant again, as if someone had turned up the colors of life. Orion nudged his hand gently, pulling Alistair back to the present moment. Alistair chuckled, scratching behind the dog's velvety ears. "Yeah, I get it. No more dwelling on what was, just appreciating what is." They stayed at the park longer than Alistair planned, the afternoon unfolding like a favorite story. Visitors came and went, many drawn to Orion's calming presence. Alistair watched with quiet joy as strangers' faces softened when they interacted with his four-legged companion, their burdens seeming to lift just by running their fingers through his golden fur. As the sunlight turned to liquid gold, Alistair finally rose with a contented sigh. "Come on, boy, time to head home." The return walk was slower, but Alistair didn't mind. Every step felt like a victory, every labored breath a celebration. That night, as Orion curled into his familiar spot beside the bed, Alistair lay staring at the ceiling, savoring a feeling he'd almost forgotten: deep, abiding peace. Over the following week, their walks became a cherished ritual. Some days they only made it to the end of the street. Others, like triumphant explorers, they reached their beloved park. Each journey felt like Alistair was reclaiming fragments of himself he'd thought lost forever. With Orion's steady presence, he wasn't just surviving, he was truly living again. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the porch in fiery hues, Maris stopped by for her regular checkup. "You're doing better than any of us expected, Alistair," she remarked, her clipboard forgotten in her lap. Alistair nodded, the truth of her words settling comfortably in his chest. "Feels good," he admitted simply. Maris's gaze dropped to Orion, whose head rested protectively on Alistair's foot. "I think someone's had a lot to do with that." Alistair's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "No doubt about it," he agreed, running a hand through Orion's thick fur. Days melted into weeks in the most beautiful way. The past no longer weighed heavy on Alistair's shoulders. The future no longer loomed like an uncertain storm. And through it all, Orion remained his constant, a warm, breathing reminder that some of life's greatest gifts couldn't be explained, only felt with an open heart. Alistair had spent those long hospital nights listening to the ominous ticking of what he'd believed was his dwindling time. But now he walked further each day, breathed deeper, savored the crisp autumn air like fine wine. Orion was always there, whether they were lounging on the porch or making their pilgrimage to the park. His quiet companionship was Alistair's anchor. "You know, Orion, Alistair mused one morning as they watched the neighborhood awaken. I never figured myself for the type to talk to a dog all day. He chuckled as Orion tilted his head, those soulful brown eyes seeming to hold entire conversations. But here we are. And you probably understand me better than most folks anyway. Orion responded with a contented sigh, resting his muzzle on Alistair's knee as if to say, that's why I'm here. Their little park became a sanctuary. Each visit, Alistair pushed himself a bit further before resting on their nauseous jewelry bench by the duck pond, watching life's simple dramas unfold. One golden afternoon, a woman Alistair recognized from down the street approached hesitantly, her young daughter clinging to her hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Jensen," she began politely. Alistair raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Yes." The woman's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I just wanted to say how lovely it is to see you out and about. My husband and I, well, we remember. When the ambulance took you away all those months ago, we honestly weren't sure." Her voice trailed off delicately. Alistair was momentarily speechless, realizing with sudden clarity how his absence had been part of the neighborhood's story too. After a beat, he found his voice. "Well," he said softly, "I wasn't sure I was coming back either." The woman's laughter danced on the autumn air, blending with the joyful squeals of children feeding ducks and Orion's contented sigh as he leaned against Alistair's leg. A perfect moment, fragile and beautiful, in a life Alistair had almost lost. "I'm glad you did," she said, gesturing to her daughter, a bright-eyed little girl who was already gazing at Orion with hopeful curiosity. She wanted to pet Orion, if that's all right. Alistair looked down at Orion, whose ears had perked up at the attention, his tail giving a tentative wag. "What do you think, boy?" Orion's response was immediate, a joyful swish of his tail end. Alistair smiled. "Go ahead." The little girl crouched, her small hand brushing gently through Orion's soft fur. "He's really nice," she whispered, her face lighting up. "That he is," Alistair agreed warmly. After they left, Alistair sat quietly for a long while, watching Orion with fondness. "You really do make people feel better, don't you?" Orion responded with a quiet wag, as if to say, "Of course I do." As the days passed, Alistair felt himself growing stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. The loneliness he had braced for after leaving the hospital never came. Instead, life unfolded in small, unexpected ways, like sunbeams breaking through the clouds. He had imagined his days would stretch out in solitude, but Orion, ever the faithful companion, had woven warmth and connection into their lives. Then came the day that changed everything. It began like any other. Alistair and Orion took their morning walk, pausing at the park before heading home. But as they passed a quiet stretch of road, Orion suddenly froze. Alistair frowned. "What is it, boy?" Orion's ears stood alert, his body tense. A moment later, Alistair heard it, too, a faint, pitiful whimper, drifting from the bushes nearby. Hesitating only briefly, Alistair carefully parted the brush with his cane. His breath caught. There, curled into a trembling ball, was a tiny puppy no more than a few months old. Its fur was tangled, its eyes wide with fear. "Oh," Alistair murmured, his heart clenching. "Where did you come from?" Orion let out a soft whine and stepped closer, his posture gentle but cautious. The puppy sniffed the air, glancing between Alistair and Orion with wary curiosity. Alistair scanned the empty street, the distant houses offering no clues. No collar, no tags, just a frightened little soul, left alone in the world. "Well, Orion," Alistair sighed, "looks like we have a situation." Slowly, he crouched down and stretched out his hand. The puppy flinched at first, then hesitantly sniffed his fingers. After a moment, its tail gave the tiniest wag. "That's it," Alistair murmured, his voice softening. "We're not so scary, are we?" Orion moved closer, sniffing the pup before giving its head a reassuring lick. The little dog relaxed, slightly, shifting on tiny, unsteady paws. Alistair knew what he had to do. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you someplace warm." With careful hands, he scooped up the puppy, cradling it against his chest. It had been years since he'd held something so small, so fragile. The puppy shivered, but didn't resist, pressing close, as if sensing safety. Orion trotted beside them, his usual calm presence a steady comfort. Back home, Alistair settled the puppy onto a thick, warm blanket near the fireplace and brought a bowl of water. The little thing lapped at it eagerly, its exhaustion evident in every small movement. When Maris arrived for Alistair's checkup that afternoon, her eyes immediately landed on the new arrival. "Well," she said, crouching with a smile, "what do we have here?" "A little stray," Alistair explained. "Found him out on the road." Maris ran gentle fingers over the puppy's matted fur. "He looks exhausted. Probably hasn't had a decent meal in a while." Alistair nodded. "I'll see if anyone's looking for him. But until then, I guess he's staying with us." Orion gave a soft huff, plopping down protectively beside the puppy. Maris grinned. "Looks like Orion approves." Alistair watched the two dogs, something warm and bright settling in his chest. "Yeah," he said softly, "I think he does." Over the next few days, Alistair put up notices and checked with shelters, but no one came forward. Whether the puppy had been abandoned or simply lost, it didn't matter. Now he had found his home. They named him Pippin. From the start, Pippin adored Orion, following him everywhere, curling up beside him for naps. The house, once quiet, now echoed with playful barks and the pitter-patter of tiny paws. Alistair laughed more than he had in years, watching Orion patient and wise-guide the exuberant pup. One evening, as Alistair sat by the fire with Orion on one side and Pippin on the other, a quiet realization washed over him. He had spent so long in the hospital, believing his life was winding down, that he was at the end of something. But he had been wrong. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Each day brought new surprises, little joys that filled the house with warmth. Pippin, with his boundless energy, had brought a spark Alistair hadn't even known was missing. He watched the pup learn from Oren how to follow the unspoken rules, how to sit quietly by Alistair's side, how to greet neighbors with gentle, wagging charm. One crisp morning, Alistair decided it was time to visit the park again. He called both dogs to his side, his canes steady as they set off. The air was fresh, the trees shedding golden leaves in a slow, graceful dance. Pippin bounded ahead, his tail a blur of excitement as he chased a fluttering leaf, barking with pure delight. Orion, ever the calm guardian, watched with what Alistair could only describe as quiet amusement. And in that moment, under the vast open sky, Alistair knew his heart was full. Then Orion lay down at Alistair's feet, content as could be. A young man jogging by slowed to a stop when he spotted Alistair. "Mr. Jensen, right?" Alistair looked up, the crisp morning air brushing his cheeks. "That's me," the man grinned. "I've seen you here a few times. It's nice to see you out and about." Alistair nodded, his fingers resting lightly on Orion's head. "I try to get out every day now." The man's gaze flickered to the two dogs. "You've got quite the pair there." Alistair chuckled, warmth blooming in his chest. "They're good company." As the man jogged off, Alistair felt a quiet but undeniable sense of belonging, like a missing piece had finally slotted into place. It wasn't just about being outside anymore. It was about being part of the world again, stitching himself back into the tapestry of life through small, unexpected connections. Pippin came bounding back, tail wagging like a metronome set to joy, and dropped a leaf at Alistair's feet as if presenting a priceless treasure. Alistair leaned down, ruffling the pup's velvety ears. "Good job, Pippin." The days melted into a peaceful rhythm, sweet and steady as a lullaby. Mornings began with coffee steaming in his favorite mug and quiet moments on the porch, watching the world wake up. Afternoons were for the park or puttering around the house, fixing little things that didn't really need fixing. Evenings brought the crackle of the fireplace, the comforting weight of Orion pressed against his leg, and Pippin sprawled out like a sunbeam given form, and always, always, that deep, abiding gratitude, a quiet hum in Alistair's heart as he drifted off to sleep, knowing Jorahuro would bring more of these small perfect moments. Then, one evening, the phone rang. Alistair didn't recognize the number, but something, maybe intuition, maybe hope, made him answer. The voice on the other end was familiar, though it had been years. "Alistair, it's Maris. Maris from the hospital." "Maris," Alistair said, surprised. "My nurse." "That's right," she replied, her voice warm as honey. "I just wanted to check in. I heard you were doing well and thought I'd see how you're getting on." Alistair smiled, glancing at the dogs curled up beside him. "I'm doing just fine. Orion's still here, and we've got a new friend, Pippin." Maris laughed, the sound bright and clear. "Sounds like you've got a full house." "It's a good kind of full," Alistair said, his voice soft. "I'm walking every day, getting stronger. Feels like I've got a new lease on life." "I'm so glad to hear that," Maris said. "You know, everyone at the hospital still talks about you and Orion. You really left an impression." Alistair's throat tightened with gratitude. "That means a lot." After they said their goodbyes, Alistair set the phone down and looked at Orion and Pippin. "Guess we're famous, huh?" Orion cracked one eye open and thumped his tail lazily, while Pippin let out an enthusiastic bark, as if agreeing. Days turned to weeks, and soon winter's frosty fingers crept in, painting the world in silver and white. Mornings dawned crisp and quiet, the occasional dusting of snow turning the neighborhood into a snow globe scene. Alistair didn't mind staying indoors, more the house felt alive, humming with the quiet companionship of his two dogs. One particularly cold morning, Alistair awoke to find Orion sitting by the front door, staring out the window with unusual intensity. His ears were pricked, his body still as a statue. Pippin, still groggy, yawned and flopped by the fireplace, stretching like a lazy sunbeam. Alistair shuffled over, his slippers whispering against the floor. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, following Orion's gaze. The street was empty, the world hushed under its frosty blanket. Whatever had caught Orion's attention remained a mystery. "Well, let me know if you see anything interesting," Alistair said, giving Orion's head an affectionate pat before settling into his chair by the fire. Eventually, Orion relaxed and returned to Alistair's side, though the moment lingered in Alistair's mind like an unfinished thought. In the weeks that followed, Alistair noticed subtle changes in Orion. His steps were slower, his naps longer. It wasn't anything alarming, just the quiet march of time, gentle but inevitable. "You're not getting younger, are you?" Alistair murmured one evening, scratching Orion's greying muzzle. Orion wagged his tail faintly, his eyes still bright with quiet devotion. Alistair swallowed the sudden lump in his throat. "You'll tell me if you need anything, won't you?" Orion leaned into his hand, a silent promise. "For now, I'm here. For now, we're okay." Pippin, ever the devoted shadow, seemed to sense the shift too. When Orion rested, Pippin curled beside him, a tiny guardian. When Orion ambled about, Pippin matched his pace, their bond deeper than words. Alistair watched them and marveled at the way life had unfolded. He'd gone from a hospital bed, certain his best days were behind him, to this, home brimming with warmth, love, and the steadfast presence of his two faithful companions. Then, on a snowy afternoon, as Alistair sat by the fire with Orion and Pippin nestled close, it struck him like a revelation. He had thought his story was winding down, but now it felt like it was just beginning, and that was more than enough. Winter's grip loosened, giving way to the first whispers of spring. Patches of grass emerged like shy guests at a party, and the air carried the faintest promise of warmth. Alistair noticed the changes outside and felt them, mirrored in himself. He was still here, still breathing, still living, and he had Orion and Pippin to thank for it. Every day was a gift, now a string of moments he hadn't dared to believe he'd experience again. The way sunlight spilled into the living room, turning Orion and Pippin's fur into halos of gold as they dozed. The whisper of wind dancing through the budding trees outside. The gentle tap-tap-tap of their paws on the hardwood floor as they trailed after Alistair from room to room to room. These small, precious moments had become the very tapestry of Alistair's life, and he cherished every stitch. Orion remained Alistair's steadfast shadow, though his steps had grown slower, his naps longer. Pippin, still bursting with puppy energy, brought a lightness that perfectly balanced Orion's quiet strength. Together, the two dogs wove joy into Alistair's days, anchoring him in the here and now. One morning, Alistair sat on the porch, cradling a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. Orion and Pippin lounged at his feet, their watchful eyes tracing the flutter of birds darting between branches, their songs weaving through the crisp spring air. It was a scene so simple, yet it brimmed with a quiet beauty that never failed to fill Alistair's heart. He looked down at Orion, whose muzzle had grown more silver than when they'd first reunited. The old dog lifted his head, meeting Alistair's gaze with those deep brown eyes that held a wisdom and a warmth that seemed to say, "You're doing just fine." "You know, boy," Alistair murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I think you saved me. I don't know how or why, but you did." Orion's tail gave a single, solemn thump against the porch boards. Pippin, ever attuned to the slightest sound, perked up and let out a cheerful bark before springing into the yard to chase a leaf twirling on the breeze. Alistair chuckled. "And you," he called after the pup, "you brought this little whirlwind into my life. Guess I owe you twice over." The days unfolded like the pages of a well-loved book, each one slipping gently into the next. Alistair felt stronger, more at peace. The memories of the hospital, the long, uncertain nights when he'd been certain he'd never leave that bed still surfaced sometimes. But they no longer weighed him down. Instead, they reminded him of the distance he'd traveled and the blessings he now held close. One afternoon, Alistair ventured farther than the park. With his cane in hand, Orion trotting faithfully beside him, and Pippin zigzagging ahead in happy bursts of energy, he walked to the edge of town. The air was fresh, the sun warm on his face. When he reached a small overlook, he paused, drinking. In the view, the rolling hills, the scattered trees, the winding dirt road that disappeared into the horizon. The world stretched out before him, vast and vibrant and alive. He settled onto a bench, Orion curling up at his feet while Pippin investigated a patch of wildflowers, his nose twitching with excitement. Alistair closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the world wash over him, the rustle of leaves, the trill of birds, the distant hum of a car engine. It was a symphony he'd once thought he'd never hear again. "You brought me back to this," Alistair said softly, resting a hand on Orion's head. "You showed me what I was missing." Orion leaned into his touch, his steady presence a silent reassurance. Pippin trotted back, plopping down in the grass before them, his tail wagging as if to say, "Don't forget about me." Alistair smiled. "And you," he said, reaching to ruffle Pippin's ears. "You reminded me it's never too late to start fresh." As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Alistair felt a deep, unshakable contentment settle over him. He didn't know how many days lay ahead, but he knew he'd cherish each one, because Orion had taught him that life wasn't measured in years, but in moments. Moments like this. Orion let out a soft sigh, and Alistair leaned back, breathing. In the peace of the evening, he had found his place, his purpose, his reason to keep going, and for that, his heart would always be full. Every day, Countless animals and people are writing their own stories of transformation, stories that deserve to be told. Then you can be part of these powerful journeys by subscribing, so please subscribe for more inspiring tales of hope and second chances. You in the next video.